Hey, nonprofit leaders, I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host of Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, the show for people running nonprofits who'd rather work smarter than harder with abundance, excellence, and courage. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to join our newsletter where every week you'll get actionable tips, inspiring resources, and updates on new episodes. You can grab it at inspirednonprofitleadership.com. And a big thank you to our sponsor, DonorBox, who has mastered the art and science of removing the friction from donation forms. And you know we love a good process at Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're going to be talking about letting people go. It's something that every CEO or executive director has to do at some point. It's often something that makes us feel uncomfortable, and it's something really important. I have found myself many times coaching my clients through letting people go. And in a way, I'll say this, I love that moment when we get to let someone go. And I'm going to explain that because it's almost always, as in, I've never found a time when it isn't an issue where it's not a great fit, either in the role or for the culture of the organization. So when we're letting someone go, we're not ruining their lives, we're freeing them from a bad relationship. But our jobs as CEOs, as leaders, there is a power dynamic. This is not an equal relationship like a romantic couple. This is a relationship with a real power dynamic. And I really feel it is the burden of the hirer to take the charge and lead the letting go if it's gotten clear that needs to happen and the staff member has not said goodbye already. So I just want to talk through a few points about how can we be sure we're making the right decision, some tips about letting go well, and we'll talk a little bit around hiring well. And I'm actually going to start there. So, because the flip side, usually the conversation that comes after my coaching calls with clients around letting one or more team members go, and it's often more than one because it's often the result of a bad hiring process. A great hiring process usually puts great fit, as in cultural fit. With my clients, we build a set of guiding principles and we hire specifically to those guiding principles, and we have a way of doing it systematically. When we have a great cultural fit or a great guiding principles hire, and those people tend to outgrow their role or outgrow the organization or want to take a change of direction, they usually don't need the leader to initiate the let go conversation. Usually they'll come and say, hey, it's time for me to move on. And the whole process gets a lot easier. So that's kind of the short version of hiring well. That's all I'm going to touch on today. But here's what I'll say around letting people go, knowing when and how to do it well. First of all, if you're thinking, I probably need to let this person go, you're probably right. Now, we're not always going to let people go just because we thought that. We're going to do some double checks to make sure we don't let someone go who doesn't really need to go, just in case it was us. And we're also going to do a process that makes it, I call it like a compassionate letting go, a kind process. I like to think of letting someone go as opening up the cage that's been keeping them caged and rolling out the red carpet so that they can have the best possible experience. That being said, I personally have never had a situation with any of my clients or myself where the instinct of, I think I need to let them go, was wrong. So probably if you're having that instinct, it's a matter of going through the steps to release them well. There's two categories we need to check. Are they a right fit for the team, right? Are we getting a lot of, kind of like complaints or even just a few complaints, right? About how they're interacting with others? Do we just always seem to see things differently, not in a collaborative, we make each other better sort of way, but it is like we're grinding together and it feels hard? Those are all signs of a bad cultural fit or a bad guiding principles fit. And when we have that, that means that they're not going to be right there's no amount of shifting their role that's going to fix the situation. And so that one's like the easier one to identify. It's usually the harder one to pull the trigger on. And that's because those folks who aren't in alignment essentially with the guiding principles about how we're going to show up, we fear the way they're going to respond because they don't respond in ways that our other team members respond. It feels unpredictable. It feels scary to us. Sometimes we have to let someone go because they're not in the right role. And that's a situation where we could potentially move them to another role. Maybe they're not in the right role because the role needs to change. And if we can keep a great fit team member and move them into a new role, that's great. And I think open dialogue around continuous open dialogue, you need to periodically check in with your team members. How are they feeling about their role? Is there another part of the organization or another role they'd like to be doing more of that they're interested in growing into? I use a leadership chart.
I'm going to go, Donna. There was this Zoom thing.
Some audio. Right. Hold on. Sometimes I use a tool called a leadership blueprint that helps me kind of work with teams on roles. And my clients, as part of the impact method, they actually do that every 2 months. They have the opportunity to look at that and say, oh, there's somebody who, raises their hand and says, like, actually, I think my role is changing, or I'm interested in doing more. And also every time somebody gets let go or we think about hiring, we're giving ourselves the opportunity to kind of reinvent all the roles in the organization. So let's go to actually letting people go. Depending on what state you're in, you need to know the laws around letting people go and what the rules are. You certainly want to follow the law. Although many states are fire at will states, meaning that you can let someone go for any reason. But once you've checked with the laws and make sure you're following those, the next thing to do is have a clear conversation. If you haven't had any conversations with that person about what isn't working well, it could have been you not having had a really clear conversation. I like to say that to be clear is to be kind, to actually tell them simply, explicitly, and without judgment what they're doing that isn't working. I think it's really important to give people this opportunity. If that's a skill that feels like you'd like to build, I highly recommend the book Radical Candor, which is full of how to just be really simple and clear. I also love Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication as having a great set of tools for how to be clear and state what your needs are in a way that isn't judgmental or violent, imposing on somebody else. If you have had a conversation before, then you're probably ready for your final conversation, which is the conversation where you're going to let them go. Going into this conversation, I want you to be clear on what are the boundaries that you're going to hold, right? Do they need to leave immediately following the conversation? Do you have some flexibility around the timeline, right? I have a client right now, we're working through this, and they're fine with the person staying through the end of their fiscal year, or they're fine with the person leaving right away, right? So when do they need to leave? What are the terms you're prepared to agree to, right? Do you have a severance package to offer? Or maybe it's a less formalized, like this will be your last day,
but you'll receive your next paycheck in full. You can think about how to be generous like that. As a guiding principle around money, I always like to say, don't surprise people with money, right? Somebody might be a bad fit. They might not have been expecting this timing. So be as generous as you can with a financial timeline that's reasonable and makes it so that they're not going to experience a sudden financial hardship. And then you can go into the conversation with everything else kind of being flexible. And you can leave certain things open-ended around and ask them, what would work for you? How would, what would the way in leaving that would make this feel like the best possible experience? What version, what can we collaborate on together to help that transition be positive? And you can go in with some ideas as well, or you can just go in and see what they say. And depending on how bad fit and their specific personality, someone might get very angry, but that rarely happens. And I've seen it happen twice in my consulting time, where someone got let go and I got a report back that they were angry and kind of threatening. But in those two instances, in neither case did someone actually take any sort of action. So just be prepared for that. That's a normal response to rejection. We all deal with rejection differently. As someone who deals with a lot of neurodivergent folks in my home life, I know a lot of people with ADHD they call it now rejection dysphoria. So they take even small things that I wouldn't consider rejection as rejection. And we can learn to just hold space for people to have that reaction. We don't have to react back. That's a piece of self-awareness that we can build as a skill, to sit calmly and not react back to someone's negative reaction. But 9 times out of 10, people act pretty positively to being let go well in a compassionate way, in a conversation where, this really isn't the kind of relationship, this isn't working well for us. And I have a feeling it's not really working for you either. What are your thoughts about what's been going on? Usually it's like, oh, yeah, I'm ready to go. Like, thank you for having this conversation. And this is even more true in the nonprofit space, because a lot of employees of nonprofits, even if they're the wrong fit, they feel a lot of importance around the mission. And they feel like if they leave, they're letting you down. So in some cases, especially in nonprofits, they need to hear that you're going to be okay. It's kind of like that, if you've ever heard about like the death conversation when someone's dying, and that you tell them it's okay to go. And so in some cases, when we're in that letting someone go conversation, we need to be able to compassionately tell them like that the mission will be able to go on and they're not hurting us by leaving. And in that way, often we can turn what we thought was going to be into a firing conversation into a quitting conversation. And we can have then a collaborative conversation about the scenario in which that happens. And sometimes people are hoping to be fired just for financial reasons, because they need that unemployment check. And that's a great thing to be able to offer someone kindly, is that, they can officially be fired and they can take their unemployment.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.